This hiking in the woods, Reddit horror story is why you never hike alone. For a seasoned solo hiker like me, the woods can feel like a sanctuary. It's a place of deep peace, where the noise of the world just fades away. But what happens when that sanctuary turns on you? This is my story. It's pieced together from the recordings on a damaged memory card my cousin, a park ranger, found. The names and locations have been changed, but the horror is real. This is a chilling reminder of why you should maybe think twice before hiking alone. Section 1. My name is Alex. To my friends, I'm the ultimate outdoorsman. My apartment isn't so much a home as it is a base camp, neatly organized with climbing ropes, maps, and gear for any weather. I'm not a reckless thrill seeker. I'm a purist. I believe that to really experience nature, you have to do it in total solitude, far away from marked trails and crowded parks. I crave the silence of a place that feels completely untouched. In my hunt for that perfect wilderness, I spent weeks scanning satellite images and digging through obscure hiking forums. I was looking for a ghost on the map, a huge patch of green with no trails, no visitor centers, and no reviews. I finally landed on a sprawling, dark forest known to locals only as the Blackwood Preserve. It wasn't a national park. I always felt those were too tamed. The preserve was different. It was a massive territory, technically state-owned, but so rugged and hard to get to that it was just left alone. The few online mentions I found were sparse and read more like folklore warnings disguised as travel advice. The forums talked about the serpent's spine, a barely there ridge trail that supposedly cut through the heart of the preserve. They also talked about legends. I read them with a smirk, amused by the local color. The main story was about the Whispering Woman, a tale the posts claimed came from the region's displaced indigenous tribes. The details were murky, like they always are. Some versions said she was a mother who'd lost her child in the woods, and her heartbroken whispers could still be heard on the wind. Other, darker versions claimed she was a lure, a spirit that mimicked human sounds to draw people off the path and deep into the forest, never to be seen again. I even found another story from the early 1900s about a logging crew. A team of 12 men set up a camp deep inside Blackwood territory. For 2 months, everything was normal. Then, the weekly supply runner showed up to find the camp totally abandoned. Tents were still up, a pot of stew hung over a cold fire, and tools were scattered like they'd been dropped mid-swing. But the men were gone. All 12 of them vanished. No bodies were ever found. The story goes that the search party found only one strange thing. Weird, claw-like symbols carved into the trees around the camp. I saved screenshots of these stories in a folder I labeled Local Color. To me, they were just campfire tailies. I'm a man of logic, of GPS coordinates and weatherproof gear. I believe in bears, bad weather, and falling rocks, not whispering ghosts. My prep for the Blackwood trip was flawless. I packed a top-of-the-line GPS with extra batteries, a compass for backup, a water purifier, and enough food for a week, even though I only planned on 3 days. I laid out my map, marking my route along the serpent's spine. I vaguely told my sister I was going hiking, leaving out the destination to avoid a lecture. It was my ritual. Disappear, unplug, become a ghost myself for a weekend. On a crisp Friday morning in October, I parked my truck on a forgotten gravel road at the edge of the preserve. The air was cold and smelled of pine and damp earth. As I walked past a rusted no trespassing sign, a deep sense of peace washed over me. This was it, the silence I'd been chasing. The first few hours were pure bliss. The forest was ancient, sunlight filtering through the canopy like in a cathedral. The only sounds were the crunch of my boots and my own steady breathing. I smiled, thinking of those foolish old stories. Whispering Woman? The only thing I could hear was nature. Section 2. I pushed deeper into the preserve for 4 or 5 hours, following the faint trail of the serpent's spine. Around noon, I first noticed it. It wasn't a sound that caught my attention, but the total lack of one. The background chatter of the forest, the birds, the squirrels, the insects, had just stopped. It happened so gradually, I didn't register it at first, but now, standing in a small clearing, the silence was absolute. This wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I stood dead still, listening. Nothing. I knew that a predator, like a bear or a mountain lion, could hush the woods. I scanned the trees, my hand resting on the bear spray clipped to my belt. But I saw nothing, and this felt different. Unnatural. I shook my head. Maybe it was the altitude. I took a drink of water and pushed on, my boots now sounding like cannon shots in the oppressive quiet. An hour later, I found the symbols. Carved into the bark of a massive oak were the same jagged, chaotic marks from the logging camp story. They were old, partially healed over, but unmistakable. I felt a little flicker of unease. I pulled out my phone more out of habit than anything, and took a few pictures. It was strange, I admitted, but probably just some local kids trying to recreate the legend. Still, the silence of the woods seemed to press in on me a little harder. I continued on, the trail climbing a steep ridge. Near the top, the trees opened up to a breathtaking view of a deep shadowed valley below. It was a perfect photo op. I took out my digital camera and framed the shot, capturing a sea of pine trees and distant mountains. I took several pictures, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. I was completely alone. I stopped for a late lunch, the unease starting to fade. To pass the time, I decided to look at the photos I'd just taken. I clicked through the images on my camera's small screen. The valley shots were beautiful. I zoomed in on one to check the focus. And then I saw it. It was almost perfectly camouflaged, tucked in the deep shadow between 2 huge fir trees across the valley. At first, it just looked like a smudge. A dead pixel, maybe. I zoomed in further, my heart starting to pick up its pace. It wasn't a smudge. It was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, and stick-thin, with limbs that were all wrong. It had no features, just a vaguely human shape standing unnaturally still. It seemed to be staring right at me, from across the entire valley. My blood went cold. I lowered the camera and stared, straining my eyes. There was nothing there, just trees. I frantically lifted the camera again, my hands shaking as I zoomed back in on the photo. The figure was still there. I toggled to the next picture, taken seconds later. The figure was gone. I flipped back. There, gone, there, gone. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. It had to be a trick of the light. Pareidolia my brain, making a human shape out of shadows and branches. It was the only thing that made sense. But the shape was so clear. And it was there, in one frame and gone in the next. I felt a primal dread uncoiling in my stomach. The forest didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like it was watching. I quickly packed my things, my appetite gone. The sun was getting lower, and the long shadows of the trees felt like grasping fingers. I started moving faster, half walking, half jogging along the trail. That's when I heard it. A single sharp snap. It came from the woods to my left, maybe 50 yards in. The distinct sound of a heavy branch breaking under weight. Way too loud for a squirrel. I froze, listened. Nothing. Just that dead, watchful silence again. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding tiny. "Is anyone there?" Only the silence answered. It had to be a deer, I told myself. Or a bear, but I hadn't heard it move away. After that one snap, there was nothing. I knew then I wasn't alone anymore. And whatever was in the woods with me didn't want to be seen. Section 3. The sun, once a comfort, was now the enemy. and its descent was terrifyingly fast. As twilight settled in, the Blackwood Preserve transformed. The majestic trees became black giants blotting out the sky, and the forest floor became a mess of shadows and unseen roots. My rational mind was starting to crumble. The whispers began so faintly, I was sure it was just the wind. I tried to ignore them, focusing on the path, my steps getting faster, more desperate. But the sound didn't stop. It wasn't the sound of wind. It had a rhythm, a sibilant, whispering sound that seemed to weave through the trees, always just at the edge of my hearing. If I stopped, it stopped. When I started walking, it started again, keeping pace with me from the darkness on either side of the trail. I fumbled for my phone, my hands slick with cold sweat. I needed a map, a connection, a lifeline. The screen lit up. No service. I'd expected it, even wanted it. Now it felt like a death sentence. I switched to my dedicated GPS. The screen flickered, searching. After an agonizing moment, a message appeared, acquiring satellites. It never found them. I checked my compass, holding a flashlight over it in the dying light. The needle wasn't pointing north. It was spinning slowly and lazily in a perfect circle. This was the moment true panic set in. All my training, all my gear was useless. The laws of physics seemed to be breaking down around me. I was lost. A trespasser in a place that played by its own rules. Darkness fell like a blanket. I knew I couldn't keep moving blind, so I desperately needed to make a fire. I found a small clearing and threw down my pack. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely use my knife to strip some bark. All the while, the whispering was getting bolder, closer. I finally got a spark. As the tiny flame caught and grew, pushing the absolute blackness back into a 15-foot circle, I felt a wave of relief. I sat with my back against a rock, hugging my knees to my chest. I was trapped in a nightmare, and the only thing keeping it at bay was a small, sputtering fire. The whispers continued, a constant, maddening presence just beyond the light. They sounded like voices now, murmuring just low enough that I couldn't make out the words. It felt like they were talking about me. Alone in the Woods, a Reddit horror story. There's a certain kind of peace you can only find when you're completely alone, deep in the woods. That's what I was looking for anyway. I needed an escape from the city noise, a chance to just unplug. For the first few hours, it was absolute perfection. Just me, the trees, and the sound of my campfire. But then I heard something. Just a whisper, riding on the edge of the wind. And I knew it wasn't the wind. If you've ever felt that chill down your spine, the one you can't explain, stick around. We've got more stories from the dark. And if you have one of your own, you know where to share it. Section 1. The Escape to Normalcy. The city was grinding me down. I know, it's a familiar story. The constant hum of traffic, the way screens burn after images onto your eyelids, the sheer weight of a million unheard conversations. I'm a graphic designer, which is 90% staring at a monitor, trying to squeeze creativity out of a mind that felt like a dried-up sponge. The deadlines were a nightmare. I wasn't sleeping, and my apartment had gone from a sanctuary to a cage. What I needed was real silence. Not the muffled, never really quiet city silence at 3 a.m., but the deep kind you can feel in your bones. The kind you only find under 1,000 old trees. I'd been camping my whole life. My dad made sure of it. He always said the woods could fix just about anything broken in a person. He'd take me to Allegheny National Forest, teach me how to use a compass, spot poison ivy, and build a fire that could survive a damp night. Those were my best memories, and with my nerves completely shot, I was desperate for that feeling again. So I took a week off, ignoring my boss's passive-aggressive email about pending projects. Packing my gear was almost like a ceremony. My old, reliable tent. A sleeping bag rated for way colder than I was expecting. My stove, my water filter, my worn-in boots. Each piece was part of a puzzle that spelled freedom. I picked a spot I'd been to years ago, a huge state park, a 4-hour drive away. It's known for thick forests and decent trails. But I wasn't sticking to the trails. I was heading for a remote area where you could hike a few miles in and camp wherever you wanted. The thought of not seeing another person for days was intoxicating. It was the entire point. The drive out was like a slow decompression. The skyscrapers shrank in my rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and finally the wall of green. I rolled the windows down, letting the clean, earthy smell of pine and damp soil purge the city air. By the time I pulled into the gravel lot at the trailhead, I felt like I could actually breathe again. There was just one other car in the lot, a beat-up blue pickup that looked like it hadn't moved in days. A tiny, stupid part of me was disappointed, so much for having the whole place to myself. But it was a huge park. Our paths would probably never cross. I swung my pack on, feeling that familiar, grounding weight settle on my shoulders. It was heavy, but it was the weight of self-sufficiency. The crunch of my boots on the gravel was the starting pistol. I checked the map one last time and stepped onto the trail, letting the trees swallow me whole. That first hour was pure bliss. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling the forest floor. The only sounds were my boots on the trail, the chirping of birds, and my own steady breathing. This was it. This was the cure. I followed the main trail for a couple of miles before my GPS told me to turn off. I found a faint game trail and pushed deeper into the woods. The underbrush got thicker, and the going was slow, but with every step, I felt the last of the city slough off me like dead skin. After another 45 minutes, I found it. A small natural clearing, carpeted with soft moss. A gentle slope led down to a creek, a perfect water source. It was surrounded by a semicircle of massive oaks, their branches like gnarled arms reaching for the sky. It felt secluded, protected. It was perfect. Setting up camp was a meditation. I cleared a small patch for the tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and created my little nylon home. Next, the fire pit. I found a natural depression, ringed it with stones from the creek, and spent an hour gathering firewood. The sun was dipping low, casting long, dramatic shadows. As twilight settled, I got a fire going. I sat on a log, watching the sparks spiral into the darkening sky, and cooked a dehydrated chili that tasted better than any restaurant meal. The world shrank to the light of my fire. Beyond it was a wall of pure black. The birds went silent, replaced by the thrum of crickets. A deep peace settled over me. I was completely, utterly alone, and it was exactly what I wanted. My mind, usually a storm of anxiety, went quiet. It was just me, the trees, and the crackle of the campfire. Section 2. The First Whisper. You know how you can just stare into a campfire for hours? I was lost in the flames, my thoughts drifting. The wood popped and hissed, that ancient, comforting sound. The air grew colder, cold enough to see my breath. Through the gaps in the canopy, the stars were starting to pop, sharper than you ever see in the city. I was thinking about my dad, about him teaching me to start a fire with one match. He called it paying respect to the woods. Take what you need, but do it cleanly. I felt a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. And that's when I heard it. It was so faint. At first, my brain didn't even register it as a sound. It was more like the texture of the night changed. A thin, high noise that came and went with a gust of wind. And for just a split second, it sounded like a whisper. I sat up straight, listening. The wind died. The crickets chirped. The fire crackled. Nothing. Pause. It was the wind. Had to be. The woods are full of weird sounds that can fool you wind in a hollow log, branches rubbing together. I've been camping my whole life, I knew the drill. I told myself my city-frayed nerves were just on high alert, my mind playing tricks on me. I took a slow breath and tried to relax, poking the fire with a stick. But that perfect peace was gone. Now, I was listening. Really listening. 10 minutes passed. Nothing. I felt stupid. A grown man, spooked by the wind. I let out a short, humorless chuckle. Then a stick snapped, loud, sharp, unmistakable. It came from the darkness, just outside my circle of firelight, off to my left. It wasn't a dead branch falling. That was a footstep. My head snapped in that direction. I froze, every muscle tight. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded pathetic. Silence, no answer. Not even the sound of an animal running off. Just a sudden, deep stillness. My heart started hammering. A deer? A bear? Both were possible. I'd stored my food in a bear canister 100 yards away, just like you're supposed to. I slowly got up and grabbed my big flashlight. I switched it on, the bright beam slicing a cone through the dark. I swept it back and forth over the area. Tree trunks, ferns, dense undergrowth. Nothing. No glowing eyes. No hulking shape. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, searching the darkness. I tried to reason with the fear twisting in my gut. It was an animal. My voice scared it, and now it was frozen, waiting for me to go away. It was a logical explanation. But as I stood there, another thought crept in. The normal sounds of the forest, ... they were just gone. The constant chirping of the crickets had faded to nothing. The frogs by the creek were quiet. It was like someone had hit a mute button on the entire forest. The only sound left was my fire and the frantic pounding in my chest. And that silence was more terrifying than the snapped twig. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. Primal. It made the hair on my arms stand up. That was it for me. I doused the fire, killing the last ember and plunging my camp into darkness, save for my flashlight beam. The act felt like a surrender. I scrambled into my tent and zipped it shut, the sound echoing in the dead quiet. I sat there in the dark, back against my pack, clutching my flashlight. I didn't turn it on. I just sat, and I listened. For what felt like hours, there was only that heavy, unnatural stillness. My imagination ran wild. I thought about the blue pickup truck. Was someone else out here? Had they followed me? Why? It didn't make any sense. Then, slowly, the sounds of the night returned. A single cricket started up, then another. The forest was breathing again. The tension eased, but the unease remained. I lay down in my sleeping bag fully clothed, a small knife from my multi-tool on my chest. Sleep felt impossible, but eventually exhaustion won. I drifted off, a sentry who had failed his post. Section 3. The spiral of stones. I woke with a jolt, heart racing from a forgotten dream as weak morning light filtered through the tent. The memory of the night rushed back, the whisper, the snap, the silence. I lay still, listening. The forest sounded normal. Birds were singing. The creek was gurgling. The oppressive weight was gone. I cautiously unzipped the tent flap and peered out. The clearing was empty, peaceful. Dew glittered on the moss. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it. Relief washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. It was just my imagination. I was a city boy spooked by shadows. I climbed out and stretched. I walked over to the fire pit to make some coffee, and that's when I saw it. It was subtle. So subtle, I would have missed it if I wasn't looking right there. Next to the ring of stones I'd built, there was another smaller arrangement. A handful of dark, smooth pebbles from the creek, laid out in a perfect, tiny spiral. Pause, I just stared at it. My brain couldn't process it. The spiral was too perfect to be natural. The stones were all the same size and color. I hadn't put it there. I knew I hadn't. I crouched down, the relief from moments ago replaced by a cold, creeping dread. The stones looked like they'd been washed. The spiral was no bigger than my hand, but its perfect form felt completely alien. Who did this? Had someone crept into my camp while I was sleeping? The thought of a stranger being just feet from my tent, close enough to leave this marker ... was horrifying. I scanned the entire campsite for footprints, broken branches, anything. I found nothing but my own tracks. It was as if whoever made this spiral had floated in and out without a trace. My mind raced. Maybe it was the owner of the blue pickup, a local playing a prank on a tourist. It was a weird prank, but it was better than the alternative. What? A ghost? I'm a logical person. There had to be a rational answer, but that feeling of being watched came back hard. The whisper, the silence, and now this. It felt less like a prank and more like a message. But what did it mean? My first instinct was to pack up and get the hell out of there, but a stubborn, prideful part of me resisted. Was I going to let a pile of pebbles chase me out of the woods? I needed this break. If I ran now, fear would win. I decided to stay. One more day. I would be vigilant. I would prove to myself there was nothing to be afraid of. But the peace was shattered. The forest no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a stage, and I was being watched. I went for a long hike, hoping to clear my head. I packed a day pack and made sure to stick to a marked trail on my map. There was safety in a marked trail. As I walked, every rustle sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to move. The forest, so welcoming yesterday, now felt menacing. I felt like I was being followed. I kept spinning around to look, but the trail was always empty. The feeling wouldn't go away. After an hour, I felt disoriented. The trail markers seemed farther apart. My GPS said I was on the path, but the woods felt wrong. Denser, darker, and then I saw another one. Just off the trail, at the base of a huge pine tree. Another spiral of stones. This one was bigger, maybe a foot across. But it was the same design, the same smooth, dark pebbles. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a prank at my campsite. This was out here, miles from where I slept. I looked around frantically. Was someone leading me somewhere? My paranoia went into overdrive. Fight or flight kicked in. I chose flight. I turned and started heading back the way I came, moving fast, my head on a swivel. The feeling of being followed was stronger now. I could almost hear a faint rustling in the undergrowth, keeping pace with me. I broke into a jog. I didn't dare look back. As I ran, I saw more of them. Another spiral on the left. One on the right 100 yards later. They were like signposts. But for what? I finally burst back onto the main trail that led toward my camp. I was breathing heavily, soaked in sweat. I had to get my stuff and leave. The debate was over. As dusk began to settle, I finally saw my clearing. I've never been so relieved to see a nylon tent. I stumbled into the campsite, exhausted and terrified. But the relief was short-lived. My eyes went straight to the fire pit. In the very center of the cold ashes sat a new spiral, the largest one yet. And in the exact center of it, resting on the ash, was a single dead bird. A blue jay, its bright feathers a shocking splash of color against the gray, its neck twisted at a sick, unnatural angle. Section 4. The Voice in the Dark. I stared at the dead bird in its spiral of stones, and a wave of nausea hit me. This wasn't a prank. Pranks are for laughs. This was predatory. The ritualistic placement, the violation. The message was crystal clear. I was here. I can get this close. You are not safe. All thoughts of being brave vanished. My only thought was escape. The sun was sinking fast. Panic set in. I knew hiking out in the dark was a stupid, dangerous idea, but staying another night was infinitely more terrifying. I worked with frantic, clumsy hands just stuffing things into my pack. Sleeping bag crammed in, dirty pots tossed on top. I collapsed the tent, yanking the poles out and bundling the whole mess onto my pack. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the buckles. Every snap of a twig sent a jolt of terror through me. I kept expecting to look up and see someone standing at the edge of the trees, watching. The forest felt like it was holding its breath. No time for a fire. Darkness was closing in. I shouldered my lopsided pack, took one last horrified look at the stone spiral, and plunged into the woods. My flashlight beam bounced crazily, a dizzying tunnel through the absolute black. The woods at night are a different world. Every tree looked like a lurking figure. I found the main trail and started moving as fast as I could. The 3 miles back to the car felt like 100. And then the whispering started. At first, it was like the night before faint, on the edge of hearing. But it didn't stop. It grew into a constant murmur that seemed to come from all around me, a jumble of unintelligible sounds. "Who's there?" I yelled, my voice cracking. The whispering stopped. For one heart-stopping second, silence. Then a single cold voice spoke from the darkness right behind me. "Alex!" Long pause. It was my name. I screamed. Not a brave sound, but a raw, primal cry of terror. I broke into a full sprint, running blindly. My heavy pack threw me off balance, and I stumbled, but I didn't stop. The whispers were a chorus now, all around me, chanting my name. Alex ... Alex ... Alex ... They came from every direction, a maddening cacophony. I felt like I was losing my mind. I risked a look over my shoulder. In the bouncing beam of my flashlight, I saw them. Tall, impossibly thin shadows detaching from the trees. Their limbs were too long, and they moved with a jerky, disjointed gait, flitting between the trees at the edge of my light. I couldn't see any details, just their horrifying, elongated silhouettes. My lungs burned, my legs were lead. I was sobbing, gasping for breath, but I knew if I stopped, they would be on me. I could hear their footsteps now, a light, quick pattering on the dead leaves, getting closer. The world blurred into a nightmare. Suddenly, the ground gave way. My foot caught a root, and I went down hard. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My flashlight flew from my hand, its beam pointing uselessly up into the branches. I was plunged into darkness. I lay there, gasping, my cheek pressed to the cold earth. The whispers stopped. The footsteps stopped. The silence was worse. I could hear my own ragged breathing. I knew they were there, all around me, just standing in the dark, waiting. I tried to push myself up. My ankle screamed with a sharp, searing pain. I'd twisted it. Then I heard a new sound. Slow, deliberate, something being dragged through the leaves right in front of me. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for whatever was coming. A strange, musky smell, like damp earth and rot, filled the air. Something cold and smooth touched my cheek. My eyes flew open. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. A slow, deliberate pressure, like a long, thin finger, tracing a line from my temple to my jaw. The cold was deathly, sucking the warmth from my skin. I flinched back with a choked cry, scrambling backward through the dirt. And then, a voice whispered right next to my ear, so close I could feel the cold breath of it. It wasn't menacing. It was calm. And that was 1,000 times worse. "Found you." That broke me. I screamed and grabbed for my flashlight, clicking it on and waving it wildly. There was nothing there. The trail was empty. But I could hear them laughing. Soft, whispering laughter that echoed through the trees. I got to my feet, ignoring the shooting pain in my ankle, and I ran. I ran like I've never run in my life, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping my face, the whispering laughter chasing me all the way. Section 5. The Escape and the Aftermath. I don't know how long I ran. My world was just pain, darkness, and that horrible, whispering laughter. Suddenly, I burst out of the trees and fell onto asphalt, the park road. I dropped to my knees, shaking uncontrollably. I looked back. The woods were dark and silent. A solid black wall. It looked so normal. But the scratches on my face, the pain in my ankle, the bone-deep cold ... they were real. I started to limp down the road, praying it led to the parking lot. Every shadow looked like a tall, thin figure. After an eternity, I saw it. Headlights. I have never felt such hope. I waved my arms, stepping into the middle of the road. I didn't care who it was. Anything was better than what was in those woods. An SUV pulled up, and a man in a park ranger uniform leaned out. "Whoa there, son. You all right?" I couldn't speak. I was a mess covered in dirt and scratches, clothes torn. "In the woods ... I stammered, pointing a shaking hand. "Chasing me ... whispering ... double quotes." His expression shifted to a cautious neutrality. He'd seen spooked campers before. "Okay, son, take it easy," he said, helping me into the truck. The warmth and the mundane smell of stale coffee felt like a lifeline to reality. I tried to tell him everything. The whispers, the spirals, the shadows, the dead bird, my name. As I said it all out loud, I heard how insane it sounded. I saw the pity on his face. He thought I'd had a psychotic break. "Sounds like you had a real scare," he said gently. "We'll head back to the station. In the morning, we can get your gear." I just nodded, too exhausted to argue. I was just grateful to be in a locked car, with another person, away from that place. I didn't sleep. The ranger, Dave, let me sit in his brightly lit office. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadows, heard the whispers, and felt that cold finger on my cheek. The next morning, he drove me back to the trailhead. I was dreading it, but my car keys, wallet, and phone were in my pack. "You sure you don't want me to come with you?" he asked. "I'll be fine," I lied. The hike back in the bright sunlight was surreal. The forest was beautiful again, peaceful. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I did just have a massive panic attack. Then I reached the clearing, and the doubt vanished. The campsite was obliterated. My tent was shredded into long, thin strips. My pack had been torn open, its contents scattered. My pots and pans were bent and stomped on. This wasn't a bear. A bear would have gone for food. This was violent. This was rage. I walked over to the fire pit. The spiral of stones was still there. But the bird was gone. I found my wallet, my cracked phone, and my car keys in the wreckage. I didn't want anything else. It all felt contaminated. As I turned to leave, I saw it. In the soft earth where my tent had been, there was a single clear footprint. It was long and narrow with 3 pointed toes, like a bird's, but it was the size of a man's foot. There were no other tracks. Just that one. I walked out of that clearing without looking back, hiked the 3 miles in a daze, and drove. I drove for hours, not stopping until the beautiful, ugly skyline of the city came into view. I had never been so happy to see traffic. Section 6. The shadows in the city, returning to my apartment, should have felt safe. For the first few days, I threw myself into being normal. I took the longest shower of my life, ordered greasy takeout, and went back to work. I told my boss I got sick. He didn't care. I tried to explain it to my best friend, Mark. He listened, but I saw the skepticism. He gently suggested I talk to a therapist. I knew how it sounded. I sounded like I'd lost my mind. So, I stopped talking about it. I tried to pretend it never happened. But the woods weren't done with me. It started subtly. I'd be working, and I'd hear it a faint whisper, woven into the sound of a passing siren. So fleeting, I could never be sure. I'd freeze, listen, and it would be gone, leaving me with a racing heart. Then came the shadows. I'd catch a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, and when I'd snap my head around, nothing. But I knew it had moved. I started feeling that old familiar prickle on my neck. The feeling of being watched. Here, in my own home, I started leaving all the lights on when I slept. The darkness was an enemy. My paranoia grew. I'd catch a reflection in a shop window, and for a split second, I'd see a figure behind me, a tall, thin shadow, standing among the normal people. I'd spin around, and there'd be nothing there. It happened in my monitor, in the bathroom mirror. A fleeting silhouette that vanished when I tried to focus. I was unraveling. The last of my sanity shattered last Tuesday. I was working from home. For a few hours, things had felt almost normal. I went to the kitchen to get some water. As I stood at the sink, I heard it. Not faint, crystal clear. A whisper right beside my ear, as if someone were standing directly behind me. "Alex," I dropped the glass. It shattered. I spun around, heart seizing. The kitchen was empty. My apartment was empty. I was alone. My gaze fell on the coffee table. It was dusty. And there, traced in the dust, as if by a long, thin finger, was a single word. Found.